25 years ago, the Treaty of Maastricht was signed on the 7th of February 1992, creating the European Union. This entity today has its base represented in South Africa. Today, with the pleasant company of the Ambassador, His Excellency Marcus Cornaro. How are you, Ambassador?
Very well, very good to see you. A pleasure to be here with you and to speak a bit about Europe and South Africa.
Excellency, as the Ambassador of the European Union to South Africa, how would you define your diplomatic tour in the region thus far? Are there any moments or events that have stood out for you?
The last 15 months I've been here were fabulously interesting, challenging and stimulating. What I would single out, I think, for your audience, looking back, is that we did manage, end of last year, to sign and ratify a new economic partnership agreement. Maybe we can come back to some of the details later on. So I think that's a hallmark agreement, changing quite dramatically the trade and investment relations between the European Union as it now stands and South Africa, but also with a regional component. Secondly, from a foreign policy point of view, it was great to have the visit here of Federica Mogherini, who is the European Union foreign policy chief. She came here in February last year, about a year ago, and also sort of had a very good engagement across the board. I would then otherwise also, I think, single out the very good trips I had throughout the country, visiting different provinces, engagements with the different mayors, the provincial governors, but also across that came to see the humongous diversity of South Africa, the different layers of the different economies, reflecting an interesting but also troubled past. And then finally, I just come back from a month in Cape Town, where we all were around parliamentary proceedings, and deeply involved as a diplomatic community, which I think is nice. As a diplomatic community, being deeply involved in also in domestic politics, as a friend, as an observer, and as a partner.
How have you and your family adapted to living in South Africa, and have you enjoyed the experience of your job in this country?
Very much so. Yeah, I'm here with my wife. My 3 children are university going, so they only come on visit, but they happily come on visit if I invite them, and they also enjoy the diversity and the opportunities of the country. My wife is German, but we did meet in Africa. In fact, 25 years back, when we were both in Zimbabwe. At the time, Zimbabwe was still a frontline state against racist South Africa, and I was in charge at the time for the Austrian Development Corporation to prepare the then SADC frontline states for the eventuality of tightening sanctions. Luckily, all of that is history now. In fact, we left Zimbabwe just when Nelson Mandela was freed, and I saw him actually coming up to Zambia at the time, being greeted by a jubilant international community. And this has bonded us together to the region very, very strongly. We have stayed in touch over the last 20-25 years. And it's sort of great to be back and feels very much home.
So actually it's 2 anniversaries, 25 years, the European Union, and in your personal capacity, meeting your wife, being in Africa, so
that's right.
It makes it interesting.
On the anniversary of the European Union, if I may ask, you correctly quoted the Maastricht Treaty, which was a very important step of deepening the European Union, but actually we're about to mark 60 years of the European Union founding treaty in Rome, 25th of March 1957.
Yeah. European Economic...
This was at the time the European Economic Community, founded by the 6 initial countries. No English at the time. These were the Benelux countries plus Italy, Germany and France. And there will be a big celebration next week, marking the 60 years. But you're right that the Maastricht Treaty 25 years ago, in terms of deepening, preparing the European Union for its current
gave it the formality.
State of affair, gave it the formality and also the strength to engage in the enlargement and other programs and projects.
Correct. Historians, and this is very interesting to highlight, have actually determined the first steps to a European integration since the Roman Empire, when So it has in ancient ages they were the first steps for a European Union.
Absolutely, yeah.
South Africa is one of the European Union 10 strategic partners, having established the EU-USA Strategic Partnership in 2006 and a joint action plan in 2007. Could you elaborate on this joint venture and on what areas of focus is the partnership currently centered on?
Yeah, I would say there's sort of two broad elements. The one is to use that partnership to strengthen EU-South African bilateral ties across a range of sectors. I mean, I mentioned already the economic partnership agreement is one big element, but we work a lot on science and cooperation, where South Africa is one of our strongest international partners in collaborating on research. We have done great strides on climate change and environment, working also very closely here with the Ministry of Environment. And then we work, of course, very closely also with the international relations biotope here in South Africa to team up with South Africa on some of the trouble spots in Africa, where both Europe has a stake, but also South Africa is, of course, a major partner for any solution. So that's sort of the bilateral angle. But the other angle, which also characterizes this partnership quite prominently, is the G20 angle, where South Africa is, of course, Africa's first or sort of only G20 member. European Union is a driving force, I think a very strong driving force on the multilateral improved global governance on these issues. And there also, during my tenure, we had two sort of success stories. The one is teaming up on the Paris Agreement on climate change. And the other more recent one was on the CITES conference hosted here in South Africa, where together with the sort of a South African moderated African approach with a European Union moderated European approach, we actually managed to get solutions to one of the more controversial issues at the CITES conference, in particular around trophy hunting and how to regulate and allow a sustainable, well-governed commercial use of wildlife.
Could you elaborate on the binding and comprehensive agreement that regulates the relations between the EU and South Africa, the Trade Development and Cooperation Agreement? In what way is this agreement being implemented? And could you mention any success stories that have emerged as a result of it?
Absolutely, yeah. The TDCA, this agreement you mentioned, has spanned 10 years of our trade and investment cooperation, and this has allowed the European Union to become South Africa's most prominent trade partner. If I only quote two figures, I mean, we account as European Union collectively for 3/4, 75% of foreign direct investment, also translating into about 2,000 European companies who are permanently invested here in South Africa, with at least 350,000 jobs directly related to these investments. And secondly, also we account for at least 20% of South Africa's export market. This Trade and Development Cooperation Agreement, meanwhile, has been modernized by the Economic Partnership Agreement, which we signed and ratified October 2016. So these are early days of implementation. But I can already say that there's a lot of new entry points, which I think would help this trade relation to grow. If I pick up only the advantages for the South African economy towards Europe, there's tremendous new opportunities in minerals, and expanded possibilities in the whole agro sector, agro industry. For the first time, we look also at fisheries. And overall, there's a big push to help the regional SACU area to accumulate value added for export to Europe, which we hope actually would allow also the Southern African economies not only to grow in quantitative terms, but I think more importantly to create more sustainable jobs.
The European Union focuses on healthcare and social development in South Africa. in particular relation to the EU's contribution to the Global Fund to fight HIV/AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria, and to the European and developing countries' clinical trials partnership. What is being done between South Africa and the EU to solidify methods and strategies of improving healthcare, not necessarily only in South Africa, but across the continent?
Mm-hmm. Indeed, this is one hallmark, I think, of our collaboration. Again, typically where we can benefit on the enormous expertise we also do find in South Africa, but also bringing to bear European Union financing together with South African challenges they do have in health. I mean, you mentioned tuberculosis, malaria, and AIDS, which indeed were at the outset to find a different mode, a different, more genuine answer to local pharmaceutical productions, as we have done jointly to the clinical healthcare trials. And South Africa was at the spearheading a new format for tuberculosis testing, which is now the worldwide hallmark on that, and helping a lot of poorer developing countries also to improve public health. So this is a tremendous success on which we continue to build. The second, not easy issue where we are partnering South Africa is indeed how to have a national healthcare system which is more accessible to all, more affordable to all, and that is not easy in a country where you currently have very good, top-notch healthcare for not more than 16% of the population, absorbing half of the public health funds on that, whereas the other half has to go to cater for sort of 85% of the population. This is again a partnership I value a lot. I mean, we don't come with a solution because it's not that we do have one, but we have a lot of different European models where different things have been tested and tried. And part of our program with the Ministry of Health indeed is to help the ministry to pilot different schemes and how this could actually work out then with being properly implemented. And it's not only a health policy issue; it's actually also a public finance issue.
Right.
Because once you roll out nationally, sort of a more private partnership-led national healthcare system, you really have to be sure that at provincial level, at municipal level, these decisions can be properly managed. And this is where we team up with another strand of a very good collaboration we do have with the National Treasury on different aspects of public financial management. But I must say a lot of credit to the South Africans also here, not to give up on this transformative agenda. And for me, I use that occasion also to say that I would like to position ourselves as European Union as South Africa's probably best long-term international friend if it comes to the unfinished business of transformation.
Yes, and health is such an important item in the development of any country or region, and Africa especially. It has suffered so much. It has been relegated for
Right.
years, for we could even say decades and centuries. If the world society gets involved the way European Union is doing in Africa, I think that would be a great milestone for the further development of the continent.
Yeah, no, I would agree, and this is also why it's interesting to note that the Center for the Global Health Fund does sit in Cape Town for the entire Africa. Again, a good example where the strategic partnership between the European Union and South Africa helps us to reach out to the rest of the continent. And I think on themes which are well understood for the population. I mean, social services are something which resonate also well in Europe, and we do get a lot of support for these sort of public funding, European Union money still going for good causes here to Africa.
Well, I congratulate you on that, and the European Union. The unique formula of unifying economies by creating one sole currency and the political measure of implementing one standard passport for all member countries' citizens are by far the most identified results of the EU, not necessarily the most important, but the most Have both delivered the expected results, and do you foresee its permanency in the long run?
Well, maybe I start out by saying that for me the most important result indeed of the European Union project remains the peace and stability on the continent.
Correct.
And the aggregate prosperity, which is just unmatched in the centuries of European Union history. It's unfortunately something which gets too easily forgotten. But you're right to say that both the euro, which 19 out of the 28 member states have adopted, and also the Schengen free travel arrangements are probably the most visible aspect of its of the convenience for the ordinary citizen to travel through Europe, but not just to travel, but also to set up shop, to settle down, to start families, start businesses, where they sort of feel best at home and anchored. And I would like to argue that the overriding advantages of that would help us to overcome what indeed is currently two unresolved issues in the European Union program. Admittedly, both the Euro and Schengen have been designed as fair weather programs. So they worked very, very well as long as everything was easy and smooth. But the European Union architecture, the governance of how you take difficult decisions on economic governance, but also on the mobility, on the migration aspect of Schengen, have not been sufficiently made bad weather proof. Right. And at the moment it's also not easy how to revise the treaty arrangements in an atmosphere which is not very conducive to get unanimous support from all corners of the European Union. So we're not on a very easy turf as far as that is concerned. But as I say, I would repeat that the overriding advantages, and I think even the envy of many people looking at us from the outside. I mean, to have a uniform currency and have that freedom of movement, of mobility, from young to the very old, from the student to the retired person, is something hopefully which will last. But anyway, I'm very confident that whatever the revision of the European Union program is, that this is the sort of positive message which will anchor sufficiently back to the population, that I'm sure we get out of the bad weather zone with an improved working of these two achievements.
Perfect. Putting together an entity like the European Union is obviously not easy, but keeping it together has proven to be a bit more difficult, thus. So in that order of ideas, having made worldwide headlines the recent event of Brexit, would you identify it as a painful experience, or one in which the European Union could meditate and reflect in order to reinvent itself or adapt to the changing economic and political affiliations of continental agencies?
Well, the verdict on that is still out. As we hold this interview, our UK friends have not even yet actually triggered this Article 50, which will start the 2-year process of what is a divorce. And as any divorce, it can be painful and nasty, but it can also be quite amicable and
like a divorce,
and fair, like a divorce. I mean, you can have a sort of a proper agreement as well. I think on both sides we hope to have a mature process which would lead to another painful divorce, but something which would leave both sides in a good position to continue to collaborate. I know this is very much also part of the UK agenda, but also very, very much part of what the European Union sentiment on that is. You asked me whether it was a painful experience. As I say, it would only be if the whole process would really turn sour, then it would indeed be not only regrettable, as I think it is, but could turn painful. If you ask my take now, I would hope that this is more or less rather a sobering shock for both, but also for Europe, a sobering shock in a sense of a wake-up call that the democratic construct, the narrative with the population, the division of whether national governments are responsible, these obfuscating blame of Europe somewhere out there. Brussels would find a better re-anchoring. And so far, what I do read and what I do see is that the 27 countries remaining have actually strengthened their resolve to make this work.
We hope all the best for such initiative as the European Union to maintain itself, to keep playing that role in economic and developing history that it has. We want to thank you, Ambassador Cornaro, for this opportunity to interview you today, to share that experience and knowledge of yours with the readers and viewers of Embassy Direct.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure. Okay, pleasure. Yeah. Thanks.